So what makes you, well, you? Is it the DNA you got from your parents? Or is it everything that happened after you were born? Your childhood, your experiences, the world you grew up in? It is one of the biggest questions we can ask about ourselves. Nature versus nurture. Today we're going to dive deep and try to get to the bottom of it. And to do that, we first need to meet two men whose story, well, it just about breaks all the rules.
Meet Jim Lewis and Jim Springer. As you can see, they're identical twins. But here's the thing. They were separated when they were only 4 weeks old. They grew up in completely different families in different towns and had no idea the other existed for 39 long years. But when they finally met, the story their lives told was just staggering.
I mean, just look at this list of similarities. It's truly uncanny. It's not just one or two little things. Both Jims had worked as part-time deputy sheriffs. Both of them drove the same kind of car, a Chevy, and both liked to vacation on the exact same beach in Florida. But it gets even weirder. They both had owned a dog that they named Toy. They both had married women named Betty, and then divorced them. One named his son James Allen, the other James Allen. Even their tiniest habits, like chewing their fingernails or their patterns of smoking and drinking, were almost identical. When you see a list like that, you just have to ask, how on earth is this possible? Remember, these guys grew up in totally different environments, different parents, different friends, different life experiences. And yet, their lives are practically mirror images. It really forces you to wonder just how much of our life is already written down in our genes from the second we're conceived. To even begin to answer that, we have to zoom out. I mean, way out. Not just looking at our parents, but at the entire history of our species. We need to get a handle on this ancient biological script that we all share, a script that's been edited and refined over millions of years of evolution. So the whole thing starts with this core idea from Charles Darwin called natural selection. And really, it's pretty simple when you break it down. Basically, nature sets up a constant test. In any species, the individuals who happen to have traits that give them an edge, traits that make them better suited to their environment, are more likely to survive, have kids, and pass those winning traits along. Do that over and over for millions of years, and the whole species begins to change. Okay, so what does that have to do with us, sitting here today? Well, that's where a field called evolutionary psychology comes in. The idea here is that this whole process of natural selection didn't just shape our bodies, giving us opposable thumbs and upright posture. It also shaped our brains and, by extension, our behaviors. It argues that a lot of our modern tendencies, how we pick our partners, what we're afraid of, are echoes of behaviors that helped our ancestors survive on the savannah thousands of years ago. And think about this for a second. Compared to pretty much any other animal on the planet, humans have a ridiculously long childhood. But from an evolutionary point of view, that's not a bug in the system, it's a critical feature. That long software installation period gives us the time we need to develop our #1 survival tool, our massive, complex brain. It's what allows us to learn language, culture, and all the crazy, complicated rules of human society. All right, so evolution gives us the big picture story of our species. But to get how that story is passed down to you as an individual, we've got to zoom way, way in, from the species right down to the cell. We need to look at the actual blueprint itself. So inside pretty much every single cell in your body, there's a little command center called the nucleus. And inside that nucleus are your chromosomes. Think of them like a set of encyclopedias. We all have 23 pairs of these volumes, for a total of 46. And for each pair, you got one book from your mom and its matching partner from your dad. Now, if the chromosomes are the encyclopedia volumes, then DNA is the actual text written on the pages. It's this amazing, iconic double helix molecule, a twisted ladder that contains every single instruction for building and running the entire you. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that all of human life is written in this one chemical language. And finally, if DNA is the text, then genes are the individual recipes within that text. Each gene is just a short segment of DNA that tells a cell how to build a very specific thing, usually a protein. And proteins are the tiny little workhorses that do almost everything in your body, from building your muscles to carrying oxygen in your blood. So how many of these little recipes does it take to make a human being? Well, when scientists first started to map out all of our genes, the prediction was somewhere over 100,000. But the actual number was a huge shock. It turns out we only have about 20,500 genes. This was a massive discovery because it told us that genetics isn't simple. It's not one gene for one trait. Instead, genes have to work together in complex networks, and this is the really important part. They're constantly interacting with the world around them. And here's a perfect everyday example of genetics in action. If you look at our chromosomes, the first 22 pairs are pretty much matched sets. But that 23rd pair? That's the one that determines biological sex. In females, you see two matched larger X chromosomes. But in males, you see one X and one much smaller Y chromosome. That one little difference in the genetic code sets off a whole cascade of developmental changes. So we've seen the deep history of evolution and the power of our genetic code. The story of the Jim twins seems to shout from the rooftops that genes are everything. But that's not the whole story, not even close. Because here's the crucial twist. Genes never, ever work alone. They are in a constant conversation with the environment from the moment of conception onwards. To really get this, we need two key ideas: genotype and phenotype. Your genotype is your complete genetic blueprint, all the DNA you have tucked away in your cells. But your phenotype is what we can actually see and measure on the outside: your height, your eye color, even parts of your personality. The best analogy I've heard is this. Your genotype is like the written musical score for a symphony. But your phenotype, that's the actual concert you hear on the night of the performance, shaped by the conductor, the individual musicians, and even the acoustics of the hall. Okay, let me show you a perfect real-world example of this in action. There's a genetic disorder called phenylketonuria, or PKU for short. This is one of the clearest cases we have, where we can see the environment literally reach in and change the outcome of a person's genetic destiny. So here's how it works. A baby is born with a specific recessive gene. That gene means their body can't break down a substance called phenylalanine, which is found in a lot of common foods. Now, if that baby just eats a normal diet, that substance builds up in their body and, tragically, causes severe intellectual disability. That's the nature part. But here comes nurture. If doctors identify this at birth and put that exact same baby on a special diet that's free of that substance, their brain develops completely normally. Think about that. Same gene, same genotype, but you change one thing in the environment, the diet, and you get a completely different person. Now, this isn't to say that the environment can fix everything. Of course not. Our genetic blueprint is still incredibly powerful, and sometimes even a small error in that code can have huge consequences. For example, Down syndrome is caused by having just one extra copy of a single chromosome, chromosome 21. And conditions like Klinefelter and Turner syndrome happen when there's an incorrect number of sex chromosomes. It's a stark reminder of just how critical that genetic blueprint is. Okay, so we've looked at our deep evolutionary past, the incredible dance of DNA inside our cells, and the powerful way our environment interacts with it all. So, where do we land? What's the final verdict on this whole nature versus nurture debate? Well, first, we absolutely have to respect the power of our genes. The story of the Jim twins is not a one-off fluke. Decades of research have shown that our genes give us strong predispositions for everything from our intelligence to our basic personality. They provide a very, very powerful script for our lives. But, and this is the part that changes everything, it's only a script. Our environment, from the food we ate as a toddler to the family who raised us to the culture we live in, that is the director of the play. The environment can choose to highlight certain lines in the script, to ignore others completely, and to interpret the whole performance in a totally unique way. The PKU story is the ultimate proof. The genetic script called for disability, but the environment directed a performance of health and normalcy. The brilliant scientist Stephen Jay Gould put it just perfectly with this quote: "Biology isn't destiny. It doesn't lock us into one specific path. What it does is create a broad range of possibilities. It sets the boundaries of the playing field. But it's our culture, our choices, and our environment that determine where on that field we actually end up playing the game." So the real answer to that age-old question is that the question itself is flawed. It was never a battle. It was never versus. It's a partnership. It's a constant, dynamic, and completely inseparable dance between the two. It has always been and will always be nature and nurture, working together to shape the person you are today. And that leaves us with a fascinating question for the future. We're getting closer and closer to a time when we can read that genetic script from day one. It's not science fiction to imagine that in the near future, new parents could be handed a full genetic analysis of their baby, outlining all their predispositions and risks. So let me leave you with this to think about. If you could have that information for your child, would you want it? And more importantly, what would you do with it?